there's a generation or two down there, and I struggle to see exactly where they're at. I just know I'm not among them, and they are not having your neutrality. They are not having your claims about a lack of intent or a lack of education. They are actively asking why they've been given whitewashed education, why they haven't been told their actual history. And what I would say to corporate America is that's the upcoming demographic that's going to be buying some of your products. And they are going to look at your statements of neutrality and your claims of being behind Black Lives Matters, and they're going to check out your boardrooms. They're going to look at your leadership teams. And if all of your hiring is down at the lower level, they're going to notice. In case you haven't been able to see, they are taking this quite seriously. And so I think that there are good bottom line reasons for some corporations to start to think about how they are going to adjust their vision for a multiracial United States that may already be here, but is certainly on its way.
And so to think about what companies are doing to release the tenacious staying power, some would argue, I think I would argue, has been a hallmark of this kind of white supremacy and white power. What do you see companies doing that is loosening that grip and flowing towards and in the direction? And what are some companies doing right? What's slowing them down that doesn't need to?
So what I would say is slowing down some companies that I've had more direct experience with is that their customers are 35 to 55. And they've been on this track with those customers. And those customers are largely within whiteness. And many of those customers are not aware of all that is going on. And so there is still a revenue spigot open. And that spigot is producing dollars. And it's very hard to sort of risk turning down that spigot for the promise that, hey, there's another spigot to open that's going to keep you viable for the next generation. And so I think it's very hard to turn away from the branding that we've had, which has sort of a clinical, medicalized, thin, white aesthetic, in order to broaden out of that aesthetic. And I think this is constantly a problem. I mean, it was a problem when the internet comes around and everybody could see, yes, it's a big deal, but we're making money off the desktop. And so, these things are very difficult to do in that sense. What I think companies are trying to do now is make public statements of support and try to find ways of putting money and sometimes actual capital, really large amounts of money, behind programs that can provide a pipeline for them to recruit from, that can provide a pipeline of services to deal with the structural inequality. And I have seen programs like this that are helping. I've seen companies invest in compensating racial ERGs within their company, paying people for the work of community that they're doing, starting to value those things. I've seen companies that are starting to evaluate their leadership teams based on their ability to promote. In general, what I see that's successful is active anti-racist policies. So just to take you back a little bit, there was a time of affirmative action. I myself am a product of that sort of golden era between, say, 75 and 85, not to date myself too much. But those affirmative action programs were taken out from the psychological model, which says, if you have race in mind, you are a racist. It didn't say it depends upon your effects. It said, if you are intentionally counting people by race, you're a racist, right? So now what's being done by some companies is in effect an affirmative action, which is, we are going to have a less racist organization. We are going to fight for this country and this company to be less racist, we are going to have race in mind as we do it. Now, as those companies move to those anti-racist strategies, many of them are going to have success. Those things will bear fruit.
Yes, I can see that. I could see how this leads in a direction out of the incoherence of not understanding one's own history, which, you know, in my experience, many white people really don't understand how things got to be the way they are. You know, there's been this blindness to that, this willing unlooking, and that's been convenient. But it's also been costly from the point of view of not allowing deep relationships to grow across racial lines, to tap the, you know, intercultural interfaces of people with really different backgrounds who have so much heart and soul and learning and value and, you know, bottom line contribution to make across those artificial lines. So to capture some of what I've heard, you're encouraging us to see from this sociological point of view, to see how groups integrate in a powerful way, rather than only looking at the impairments that happen at a psychological level. We've talked through how white culture has, as a political group, retained power and maintained a, I mean, I'll use my word, a sort of a stranglehold on economy and business systems, and how companies and organizations have often had a very limited view of what diversity, equity, and inclusion can mean by developing programs that, in a sense, may even reinforce the problem that they're superficially seeking to address. And that it's critical to take this deeper look that involves change from within for those who are in power, who benefit from white supremacy in its presence, its history, and its pervasiveness, and make room, as well as begin to catalyze some of the potential business and personal and professional value of having an integrated, multiracial, multicultural company and organization, which will be more able to not only tap future and present markets, but be better equipped for the American future that, in some ways, we've already seen has developed success in some companies, but also in the military that you started out with, in terms of its ability to integrate and to create a better force through integration that's done in that systemic manner. I've just tried, there's so much in what you have to offer that I wanted to try and consolidate it for myself. Was there, you know, anything really critical in what you're sharing about doing that hard work that that you think deserves additional attention?
Let me put a little bit of a finer point on it and do it from maybe a little less code switch position. And going back to your question about what organizations are doing that they're successful with. So it operates like this. George Floyd is murdered, and we're all against that. But there are people in Minneapolis neighborhoods paying for the police that are crushing those neighborhoods. And they're really nice people, and they don't mean anything, right? So now if we take it away from there and we go to, say, the West Coast where we are, you have companies where they exist in completely segregated neighborhoods, where we could list the people within whiteness, the identities within whiteness that they really allow into their organization, into their neighborhoods, into their schools. They live these completely isolated existences, right? And all the while seeing themselves as not racist at all. So the thing about it is, the way racism happens has always been institutional. And the way that whiteness operates is by always making it psychological. So you put all this money into DEI programs, specifically designed not to see how it is you're actually carrying on the work of white supremacy. And then there'll be complaints like, wow, it's not really working. We've put however many billions of dollars into it, and it hasn't happened. You know, the thing is, it hasn't happened in your neighborhood either, but you haven't left your neighborhood. It didn't happen in your schools, but you haven't left your schools. You're still going into those meetings. And where are the Black women in those meetings exactly? But you don't walk out of those meetings and you don't say anything. But you want to put all of this money into DEI resources. The problem's not those resources. The problem is you. You have to change. That's the thing about it. And even if we get past the notion of doing it for altruistic reasons, even if you don't buy my idea that there's a coming demographic that will require it, there's also a split here. For those of you who looked at George Floyd and thought, that is inhuman, awful, that has to be stopped. For those people, with whom will you politically combine to stop it? Because there is another part of whiteness that has already shown it will do whatever is necessary in order to maintain that power. And you can't combine with them. It's becoming more and more distasteful. So who will you combine with? Well, you would need to combine with the very people you have segregated yourself from and have no practice actually connecting to. Until you come out of your privilege, you cannot make the connections that will allow you to create the country that you actually want. Seeley taught us this in The Color Purple, right? Until you do right by me, everything you even think about is going to crumble. As right now we see what is going on in this country, as we see democracy crumbling in front of us, your ability to connect with Black and brown people, with people across gender identities and across sexual orientations, that ability to connect is really the foundation of all of your organizations. It's the foundation of your neighborhoods. It's the foundation of all the privilege that you've had so far, and it is crumbling before our eyes right now. It is time to come out of that privilege. Connect to your actual history, embrace your actual culture, and do this good work. But it starts with seeing it as your work to do in the first place. So Out of Privilege does work with in corporate environments. We also do individual workshops or group workshops with individuals who are just trying to do this work, because this work, we think, is vital work. We can't have nice things until this work is done, and the clock is ticking.
Wow, that's a powerful, compelling case that you're building here and making. You know, you called out at the beginning that this is hard work, and I think for many people it's very uncomfortable work, but for you to point out that it's also good work, I think that should really not be lost on anyone. And you know, I really hope we can. So there's a refrain which might be something like, "Yeah, I get it." And there's a difference between "I get it" as a white person and getting it. And it involves more honestly looking at history and letting go of some of its, well, it's a combination. There's a history to see, and then there's a history to be honest about, and then there's a history to accept, and then there's a history to indicate I do not have to be, I'll just simplify and say, I do not have to be all things that my father was or that my great-grandfather was. And we can consciously acculturate as opposed to unconsciously acculturating, at least to some degrees. And unless and until we do that, we're going to just continue to repeat and follow along in the channels that have been laid down before us. I want to ask, you know, what do you see when you see white people taking the actions that you think will have significant results, what does that look like when you see it?
So in the workshops that we do, and in the work groups that we do, usually the first inklings of it will be someone saying, "Oh, I heard this," or as we go through things, "Oh, I realized I said this at that point." Like there's all these revelations of within your own life of things that were passed over, glossed over, because that's the work of maintaining privilege. And you begin to see things that you never saw before. Like you recognize what they are. And they're really fun. Like I know the work is hard, and I know that sometimes it's like, oh, if I have to take on all of white history, that sounds like I don't want to do that. But the truth is, Black history is yours too. You know, the immigrant history is yours too. It's not just mine. I don't own it by some biological means or whatever. So your fathers are much more varied than you are right now allowed to think. But usually it just starts with starting to peel off these little layers. And as it goes farther, you begin to hear race being done by white people around you more and more. And again, this is whiteness as a political party, not just phenotypically white people. And then sometimes you get a little bit irritated at people who are doing it and not seeing it, as every new student does. You have that one psych class and all of a sudden you're critiquing norms all over the place. And so those things happen. But we also have people that have decided to live in a different neighborhood, to have a different set of experiences, to actually go find Black and brown spaces to spend time in, churches and things like this. Now, keep in mind, Black and brown people may not want you around. There is a history. But you can see people opening up their lives as they see, almost in a way, what has been denied to them, although it's them doing the denying. This is an opening up of your world. It can really be fun. And the work groups themselves are places where I've really seen friendships grow, where actual connections are made. A lot of the work is lovely.
So you see and believe in a world that is out of privilege.
I do. I am. I have to. I just have to. I can't make a case for it based on the history of the country necessarily. However, we have had multiracial coalitions all over the place. Like now they've been violently crushed usually, but they are there. I mean, they have put highways through multiracial neighborhoods. They have paved them over. I'm in San Francisco right now. There was a place called the Western Addition, which was a beautiful multiracial environment where people were just kicked out and it was laid barren for a decade or two. And so you have fewer Black people in San Francisco, right? So there's been this conscious work to keep these multiracial groups apart because we are so powerful when we come together across these identities. If we can establish trust and live with each other, we can have the organizations, the schools, the neighborhoods, the country that we want. I do believe it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the patience and courage and active engagement that you've offered us in the way that you're helping us through the discomfort to see how so much of the hard work really is good work, necessary work, and work that it's time to do now and that many people are ready to do. So thank you so much, Byron. I really appreciate you taking the time.
And I want to thank you and Sia and TEDx Seattle for allowing me this forum. I'm really appreciative.
Yeah, is there anything else that you want to leave us with as sort of in closing?
Just that the first entanglement that you'll come across is always the same. You'll want to point at others. You'll want to point at the knee on George Floyd's neck. You'll want to point at those men murdering the Georgia jogger, or to Breonna Taylor's still unarrested killers. The first step is always pointing at you in your racial context. Find that first. The rest will follow.
Thank you.